Today's daf is daf Yud. We're going to start with daf Tesom and Beis, about 10, 11 lines before the end of the Amud. Ula Rabbi Yochanan. Ula Rabbi Yochanan di Omar. Rabbi Yochanan's Shita later on is that if a person sends the era, that means like a torch that's lit with a cherishot v'katan, he's poter midini adam because of the principle called savta de cheresh garmala. In other words, it was the cheresh who actually took the torch and applied it to a building, and so that the mishalech was not in any way guilty of a maisa hezek. And the Gemara says that according to Rabbi Yochanan, afilu masalo shall heves nami potter, even though he gave a lit torch to the chereshot v'katan, he's potter. And the Kavase Hacha, the Gemara finds a parallel case in Shar Mutar V'Bar Megula. He gives over to a Chereshot V'Katan a shar that's not tied up, or a bar that's absolutely exposed. Maishna Hacha, Maishna Hacha. So the Gemara doesn't understand, why is it that, according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you send an Eish in the hands of the Chereshot V'Katan, you're potter, but if you send a bar which is open, it's megula, or a shar which is mutar, it's not tied up, in the hands of the cherishot v'katan, you're chayav. And the Gemara answers hasam there in the case of shalheves savta de cheresh kagarim. It's the actual maisa hezek that was done by the cheresh that caused the hezek. He took the fire and he extended it and applied it to a building, to a gadish. But here, in contrast, in the case of shar and bar, lo tzavta de cheresh kagarim, the hezek was the animal or the bar, and in both cases, he is the balabar, the pikeach, and therefore he's chay. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa, chomer be nizke shar mi be nizke bar, and chomer be nizke bar mi nizke shar. Chomer Bishar mi bar shashar mishali v'sakofer. Now the word chomer here should be interpreted in two ways, and both are correct. Number one, it means what dinim are lechumra to impose compensation requirements on the bala mazik, and number two, what is the nature of the mazik itself? So first, the Brisa explains that shar has a chumrah in dinim, in the actual laws of compensation, that if a shar kills a man, then the owner of the shar pays kofer. On the other hand, a shar, even a shar muad, that kills I'm sorry, what I meant to say is that dafka shar muad, I said even a shar muad, sorry. A shar amur that kills an eved is chayav b'shloshim shel eved. So that's the knas that you pay for the death of the eved on the hand by the shar. Now, we don't care exactly what the eved is worth on the market. You could have an eved that's worth shloshim, you could have an eved that's worth much more, much less, but that's a standard fee that the Torah established for the bala shar. He pays for the eved shloshim shkolim. Another chumrah in shar, if a shar kills a man, the nigmar dino, after the gemar din l'skila, aser b'ana, you cannot have benefit from the shar, even if you checked it properly. With the best shchit in the world, it's aser b'ana. Now the Brisa zooms in on the essence of the mazik of shar, and that is darko lelech ulahazik. By its very nature, it goes out and damages. Mashen came a bar. None of these dinim apply to bar. Bar is not going to be chayev for kofer. He's not going to be chayev shloshim shel eved. He's not going to be aser b'ana, and he's not darko leilach lahazik. In the case of the bar, it's the nizak that comes to the mazik. Chomer bebar b'vishol. Let's flip it around the other way around. What are the chumras of bar? Shabar tchilas asiyos l'nesek. Now it's very interesting because in the Seder Advarim, what happens is that in the case of bar, the Gemara doesn't indicate any chumras in bar lemaisa befall in terms of payment and compensation vis-a-vis shar. And the Gemara in this brisa skips all the way to the essence of the bar And what is the chumrah of bar over shar? After all we said about bar, that it doesn't go out to be mazik. But the answer is shabar tchilas asiyosel nezek. What purpose, what constructive purpose does a bar have? Zilch, nothing. All it is a mazik, which is not the case of a shar. Umuad mitchilaso. In contrast to the shar, where the first three negichas are that of a shar tam, you only pay chatzi nezek. In the case of a bar, it's called muad from the get-go. And all this is mashen ki b'shar. Now we begin daf yud. Chomer b'shar mi b'eish. Chomer b'eish mi b'shar. Chomer b'shar mi b'eish. Shashar mishalim kofer. V'chayev b'shloshim shel eved. V'nigmar dino aser bano. So as we saw earlier, these dinim are unique to shar, that a shar muad who kills a person. If he's a ben chorin, you pay kofer. If he's an eved knani, you pay shloshim shel eved. And after the Gemara din, the shar is aser bano. Another unique chumrah of shar that doesn't exist in eish, and that's misara l'cherish shot v'katon chayav. None of these dinim apply to eish, and therefore, if the eish was responsible for the death of a person, whether it be a ben chorin or an eved knani, there is no tashlum of shloshim shel eved or mishal kofer, and there's no gmar din. Plus, if you give, as we saw in Rabbi Yochanan earlier, a shalheves over to a cherishot v'kadon, and the cherishot v'kadon did the maisa hezek, and that's called Tzavta the Cherish Garmala is pot. Chomer Eish Mi Babar. And what is the Chomer on the flip side of Eish Mi Bashar? And that is that Eish Muedes Mitchilas Veshenkin Shar, because Shar, we have to wait till the fourth Nezek, the Gicha, in order to pay Nezek Shalom, and Eish will pay Nezek Shalom on the first Hezek. Chomer Bi Eish Mi Bar, Chomer Bi Bar Mi Beish. The unique chumrah of bar is that from the get-go it has no constructive purposes at all. If you give a bar over to cherishot v'katan and somebody gets damaged, then you pay for that. And masha ein kain vi eish, in the case of eish, it's the actual adloka that's considered the yitziras hamazik, and therefore, in and of itself, an eish is not tchilas asiyosel in nezek. It could be used for many constructive purposes. However, if you are moser eish l'cherish shot v'katan, then even though you are chayev in the case of bar, but in the case of eish, you're potter because savta the cherish kagarmale chomer bi eish mi b'bar sha eish darko lelech ulazik. In the case of bar, it's the nizak that comes to the mazik. The eish goes out to damage the nizak, and muedis lechol bein davar roila ubein davar she'eno roila. Mashen kibbor. So let's interpret this Gemara in the opposite way, so to speak. We go from the bottom to the top instead of the top to the bottom. In the case of bar, it's ein darko lelech ulahazik, and you're only chayev on davar haroila. What's davar haroila? That means if an animal falls into the bar, but if a human being or kalim fall into the bar, that's not considered roila, it's not shchiach, and you're potter. And this we derive from psukim. Eish, on the other hand, is darko lelech ulahazik, and not only that, it's mu'edes, even for a davar she'eno roila, like something that it normally doesn't burn, like not eitzim, but a kli, let's say a metal kli, and it gets scorched and so forth. So on, you have to pay for damages. Bar is part of a kalim because the pasuk says and the chachamim later on in Daf Nun Gimel darshin chamar v'lo kalim. So a keli that falls into the balabar is patur. Masha ain't in the case of shar, the shar is chayav for kelim. If let's say he was no geach kelim, or he was no geach, an animal that was holding on to kelim and the kelim broke, then he has to pay for the kelim. Mani. The Gemara answers, you're asking why he doesn't mention the Chumrah of Shor Chai Mekalim and Bar is Potter Mekalim, because the author of this price is Rabbi Yehuda. The Machayev al Nizkei Kalim Bar. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if a Kli falls into the bar, Yochai of the Baal Bar pays, and we don't dash in Chamor V'lo Kalim. Frek the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, if the Brisa reflects the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, Amos Sefer, what are you going to do with the Sefer of the Brisa? Chomer Be'eshmi B'bar. Sheish darka leila chalasi wedis lechel. Bein davar roila, bein davar shena roila, mashenke bebar. Bar is potter for Caleb because it's a davar shena roila. Normally, Caleb would not find themselves falling down at the bottom of the bar. But in the case of Eish, you're chayev for both Davar Roila and Davar Sheina Roila. Davar Roila, meininu Eitzim. Davar Sheina Roila, meininu Kalim. And yet the Eish is chayev on the hezek of Kalim. He has to pay the Bala Kli if his Kli got scorched and it got burnt. And therefore the Brisa says, Mashay Kibib Bar. Because Bar is part of it is Kalim. And we said it's not Regilus, she's Kalkalu Kalim, but if he lost him, Litocho. And the Gemara adds the following: Ve'i ke Rabbi Yehuda Amrit shemachayev hoya Rabbi Yehuda al niskei kelim bebar. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that if a kli falls into the bar and smashes on the bottom of the bar, then the bala bar is chayev to pay for the keli. And therefore, if the Brisa reflects the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, then we're in trouble. We're stuck with the Sefer, because the Sefer says that a bar is not Chayf and a Roylo, which means Kalim, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is Chayv on Kalim. Ella Liolam Rabbanan. We're going to go back to our original position that the Brisa is authored by the Rabbanan, and bar is Potter on Kalim. The ton of a shear, and even though the Brisa could have included the case of what? Of Kalim, the Brisa left out Kalim. Break the Gemara classic. My shear, the high shear. Why did the Mishnah choose to omit Kalim in bar? And the Gemara answers Shir Talmud. That Talmud, which a bar is potter on, which a bar is chayav on and a shor is chayav on, but an eish is potter on, was left out of this brisa. And therefore we see that the Tana left out two chumras. The chumrah of the Chiv Talmud in bar and shor, which is not parallel eish, and the chumrah of Chiv Kalim, where the shor is chayav and it's not chayav in bar. The Gemara gives another answer. Li'olam, I'm telling you, the Brisa reflects the Shita Rabbi Yehuda. And that's why it doesn't mention anything about the chumrah of shor mi bar. That is shor is chayav for Kalim, and a bar is pot of a Kalim. The Olam Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why the Chumrah of Sharmi, the bar that a Shar is Chayiv on Kalim, bar's pot is omitted, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that a bar is Chayiv in Kalim. But then you raise the objection, because in Eish it says that you Chayiv on a Dover Sheina Royla, which means Kalim, and Lechora, that means that in contrast, bar is pot from Kalim, and that's against Rabbi Yehuda, because Dover Sheina Royla, Lav Lasuya Kalim Ella. But rather, we're not going to say that the Dover Sheina Royla is referring to Kalim, as we said before, because that cannot work out with Rabbi Yehuda, but rather, Lasuye, Lichacha niro b'sichacha vanav. And now we're talking about what's called nizke karka, where the nezek happened, in this case through Eish, to karka. In the first scenario, it's niro. Niro means a sada that they were choresh, and they open up the furrows of the ground so that the rainwater will seep in. And now the Eish would burn up this charusha, this niro. And that's called charcha es hakarka. And sichacha avonim, which means that the Eish, when it coats over the path of stones, it causes characha. Characha means a blackness on the stone. It's mekalkel the stones. And in bar, there's no such thing as hezek on karka. Maskif lo Ravashi. Ravashi doesn't like the last teretz of the Gemara that the Brisa stims with Rabbi Yehuda and it enumerates all the chumras of each one of the mazikit that don't exist in the other mazik. Listening chomer b'shar mivar shashar chayabot shar psulei mukdashim mashenke b'bar. In the case of a shar, if the shar attacks what's called a balas mum, it means a psulei mukdashim. It means that this animal was kadosh l'mizbeach, and then a mum fell into the animal, and the bailam were poda the animal, and that's called b'mono. It's only also b'giza uba avoda, and you can't drink its challah. But if it dies, then you're not allowed to be machil the nevela to klovim. This is all a residue of the original kedusha limizbeach before the mum. Masha ein came bebar. If a shar of psulei mukdashim falls into a bar and dies, then the balabar is part of mitashlumin. And why is that? Because the pasuk says "V'meisiya lo," and we just finished establishing that in the case of shar psulei mukdashim, after it dies, you're not allowed to have any benefit from the body of the animal. And you have a kelev, you want to feed him the nevela of this animal, you're not allowed to do so. Since the Tana omitted the P'tur of Kaleb B'Bar and the P'tur of Talmud B'Eish, it omitted likewise the P'tur of all Nezikin except for Shor in P'sulei HaMekdashim. Ela Amit Rabbi Yehuda my Shir Dai Shir. What chumrah, in addition to the chumrah of Kaleb in a bar, can we add according to Rabbi Yehuda? And the Gemara answers Shir Dash Ben Niro. What the Brisa omitted was a case of a shor that stamped on a soda charusha with kavana lekalkala, and the Baal Shor has to pay for that. But in bar, there's no such thing as nizkei karka. Frekti Gemara imi shum dash ben niro lav shiurahu. That's not a shiur. The Tanya because the Brisa, when it mentions the chumras of shar over bar, yishikein darko leilach alahazik. And all different ways in which it was mazik is considered darko leilach ulahazik. I don't know if you're still around, Rabbi. Anyway, hirsharti b'miktsas nizko. What's miktsas nizko? Oh, there you go. Ton Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa. Hirsharti miktsas nizko chavtiv tashlume nizko. I'm chai for the entire tashlumen, even though I was only machshir part of the nezek. Kehechsher kol nizko, as if I was machshir the entire nezek. Ketzad hachofer bar. Tisha, he digs about Tisha Tfachim, which is only roy lahazik es ha'ada, but not lahamis. Uba acher v'shlimon. Now Shimon comes along, and on top of the 9 Tfachim that Reuven does, he Shimon adds another tefach, and now there are asara tefachim to the bar, and a shor falls in and dies. Ha'achron chayim. Now wait a second. The achron has to pay for nizkei bar when the shor dies in the bar, but he wasn't the one who was machshir the bar. He only dug the 10th tefach, so he was only machshir miktas nizko. And the Gemara says the lo kerebi, the sanya chofer bar tishu b'achar v'shlimal asara achron chayav Rebbe Omer achron lemisa achar shneim l'nizakim. Although Rebbe admits that the last achron, the last digger who dug from 9 to 10 tvachim, he's chayav for the entire nezek. That's only lemisa. That's only if the shor died when it fell into the bar, because only the chofer bar tisha. I'm sorry, the bar acher v'shlima. Only he's setting up the bar as a bar of mavis. But in Ezekiel, if the shor breaks a leg after it falls into the bar, only the nizok has to pay for that. And Shnea means each one's going to have to pay half of the nezek. So Achron Chayav only applies to Misa, but not to Nizikin. Rav Papa Amar Lemisa v'divrei hakol. According to Rav Papa, you could say that the Mishnah is talking about the shor that fell into the bar died, and everybody agrees, even Rebbe would agree that only the Achron is Chayav. Iko di Amri, Lema de Loka Rebbe, shall we assume that the Mishnah is against Rebbe, because according to Rebbe, the bar is Mesiachis to Shneim L'Nezikin, Omer Rav Papa Divrei Hakol, L'Misa V'Divrei Hakol. Maskif Lo Rav Zera, V'Su Leka. Why did you get so hung up on this case in particular of someone who dug 9 tefachim and then someone came along and dug the last tefach? Forget about that. I have another case of Miktas Nizko Masar Shoro L'Chamish B'nei Adam Upasha Bo Echad Mehem Behiz. So again, we don't know exactly what happened here. The Gemara is going to try to analyze it, but basically there were 5 individuals that were responsible to be shomer the shor. And one of them, we don't know which one, was a poshea. He just stood up and he walked out and he says, I'm out of here. I'm not doing any shmir. Now, when the hezek happens, then the person who's poshea, that very guy who upped and left, he's chayav. He has to pay for the zikah. So Rabbi Zera argues that this is a perfect case to fit into the Mishnah of Miktas Nizko. Of Hechsharti Miktas Nizko. And the Gemara has the following question: what's exactly the reality here? If the Shmira couldn't have been without him, and he was critical to the Shmira, and he upped and left, then Pshita, it's simple, to Iu Ka'avad. That he was machshav the entire nezek. So that's not considered echarti mixes nizko. Ela debalav iu nami mintar. Even if he ups and leaves, nevertheless the shor will still be nishmar al yedei acherim. So where's my kohavid? So why do you consider him a posheya? Maskif lo Rav Sheshes, he doesn't understand the kasha. For ika marbe bechavila. So after he lit the fire on the logs in the fireplace, now his friend adds more eish. And if you add more eish, you can end up with more hispashtos. So once again, we have to figure out echidami. What would have been if he wouldn't have added those extra chavilos of eitzim? That's what the Gemara is going to try to analyze now.